The Glacier National Park is located in the northwest of Montana and encompasses more than 1 million acres of wilderness area. The park attracts around 3 million visitors every year, and while the vast majority come and go without a problem, that cannot be said for everyone, and certainly not the people that we're about to discuss. Dr. Lumley was 27 years old when he disappeared from the park. Lumley's specific area of expertise wasn't actually mentioned, but it was said that he was at the park for a period of study and hiking. Whatever this primary area of research was, he was also an educationalist that worked in Columbus, Ohio, and he was very highly regarded within the university. The first I heard of Dr. Lumley came from the Helena Independent Record on the 2nd of September 1934, where this was stated. No evidence had been found today by Royal Canadian Mounted Police that Dr. F.H. Lumley had come into Canada from Glacier Park, where police and park officials have conducted a search for him since August 13. So, the point at which we're jumping in, and the point at which the press picked up the story, is a couple weeks in now. Almost 3, and it seems as if at this point there's a bit of debate as to whether he was in the States or whether he'd crossed to Canada. Without trying to sound overly cynical here, this was probably fueled partially as a result of ongoing expenses of the search. At least, that's how it's coming across since he disappeared very close to the border, which isn't exact. In any case though, the Canadians stated that they'd found no evidence that he'd crossed over from Montana. On both sides of an international boundary line, the difficult search for Dr. Lumley, last seen at Goat Haunt Camp, will be pressed tomorrow with increased vigour. Park officials are en route now to the north central portion of the park with men, who Sunday will conduct an intensive search of that section, and Royal Canadian Mounted Police will lead a group of Canadian volunteers in an investigation around Waterton Lake on their side of the line. There is unfortunately no specifics in regards to the moment of disappearance, but this is because Dr. Lumley was completely alone when this took place. He travelled to the park by himself and then began his studies and hiking alone. A patrol of the Waterton Lake shore today revealed nothing, and the officials directing the search were meeting with blank walls in their effort to locate him. The hunt directors said today the search is approaching the proportions of the famous Whitehead boys case in 1924, except that the present search is more baffling. We'll have a look at the Whitehead disappearance shortly. For now though, one reason they were stating that this case is perhaps more baffling is because search leaders began to uncover conflicting evidence and receiving conflicting reports as to the direction in which Dr. Lumley might have gone. One article stated, though I couldn't find this anywhere else, that 2 sets of footprints had been found heading in completely different directions. When the first set were found, they were presumed to have been made by the doctor and gave the searchers an area of focus. However, a second group found identical footprints, or I suppose at least seemingly identical in another area some distance away from this one. It seems at that point they weren't sure what was what or if either had even been made by Dr. Lumley. With that weirdness out of the way, this was also reported. Those in charge of the hunt have several conflicting reports as to the direction in which the educator might have proceeded. The Bureau of Investigation, Department of Interior, has been contacting persons who might have seen Dr. Lumley in the park after August 13. They have learned nothing except that the missing man evidently fully intended going to Canada. On August 12, the Ohioan revealed to a park guide his intention of walking around Waterton Lake in Canada. So, the search of that area now makes sense. However, despite the said extensive search, they never found anything in that area to indicate his presence. A plethora of experts also came forward to weigh in on this, and after discussions with the park's superintendent, E.T. Skoyen, the conclusion drawn was that it would have been almost impossible for someone to survive in this area after having already been missing for around 3 weeks. Dr. Lumley's father said that he held on to the hope that his son will be found. This seems to have been spurred on after finding out that an extra 200 men and women were about to join the search. However, still without definitive leads, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, US Department of Justice agents, and rangers of Glacier National Park continue today their search for Dr. Lumley. Park officials cling to the hope that the doctor has been lost in the Canadian wilds and is safe, but out of touch with communication facilities. Friends of the doctor began to wonder if he might have joined another group while inside the park. Apparently, he held a great interest in mountain climbing, and because of his outdoor skills and knowledge of the area, it seems that his friends were having a hard time believing that he had simply become lost on his original route. Instead, stating that if something like this happened, it means he would have deviated from his plan and become lost somewhere else, thus explaining why nothing at all was being found. It seems that the friends were able to convince the authorities that this was at least plausible, and I assume that because there were no clues or leads or anything like that, they felt that it was at least worth a try to explore this avenue. So, authorities from the park began to contact various hiking and mountain climbing clubs that had travelled to the park during the time of this ordeal. However, again, not a single person had even seen Dr. Lumley. At this point, the argument, we'll call it, between authorities cropped up again. The American side, because they were finding absolutely nothing, I assume, declared that they held a strong belief that Dr. Lumley must have crossed the border into Canada. A strong belief was expressed today that Dr. Lumley, after leaving Gotaunt Camp the morning of August 13, travelled to the Waterton Lakes district in Canada. Dr. Lumley was last seen as he left the camp on a hike, and park officials today said late information from persons who had talked with him indicated that he had planned to go to Waterton Village in Canada. A search in this district thus far has failed. So, I suppose the initial question must be, did he even actually make it to Waterton during this hike? The Canadian authorities stated that they'd searched this area, especially around the lake, but found no evidence of his presence. This was then stated 5 weeks after Dr. Lumley was last seen. Park Superintendent Skoyen, who personally has directed much of the search, said that after following all leads and clues, investigations of hotels, lodges and camps, innumerable interviews with park visitors and workers, not the slightest trace of Lumley, an experienced mountaineer, has been uncovered since he left that camp. He then went on to discuss that they had faced harsh weather during the search as it kept worsening throughout, and that at around the time of this article, they had to postpone the search because of heavy rains. He also discussed that they'd had many bloodhounds on the scene, but they hadn't been of any help. 6 weeks after the disappearance took place, Dr. Lumley's parents arrived in the park. It seems to me that the search effort was beginning to fade, and the parents were hoping to try to keep it going. Some members of the search crew told the local papers that this is one of the strangest disappearance cases they'd ever been involved in. They said that they'd never been part of a search before in which there was zero evidence of a person's presence. And they're right, it's almost like this man fell off the face of the earth. There were 3 main hypotheses. The first was that he had simply become lost in the wilds of the park. But after authorities were told by that hiker that he saw him on the day of disappearance and that he wanted to go to Waterton, that became the second hypothesis. The third was that he may have got lost on Mount Cleveland. Mount Cleveland was heavily searched as this was the area spanning between Gotaunt Camp and the Waterton village, obviously without finding anything. Something odd occurred around a week after this, so 7 weeks after the disappearance. I'll let the Washington Evening Star explain. A new mystery angle had been added today to the disappearance of Dr. Lumley. It has been disclosed a registration book at Ilmory Lodge, where the professor's mother was a visitor earlier in the summer, had been tampered with. Besides Mrs. Lumley's name in the registration book, the words "and son" had been added. The missing man's mother declared it was not the writing of her son nor herself. Wintry weather in the national park brought a halt to the search. It was heavy snowfall specifically that stopped the search. But I also have absolutely no idea what was going on with the registration book, and this seemed to confuse everyone. No one could really come up with a motive as to why this might have happened, or what the purpose of it even was. As far as I'm aware, Dr. Lumley nor his remains were ever found. The last mention of this I could find was over a year later on the 3rd of October 1935 with this headline: Glacier and Waterton officials still unable to find Dr. Lumley, who disappeared last season. However, while learning about Dr. Lumley, and as mentioned earlier, I came across the Whitehead brothers, who disappeared 10 years prior. The Whitehead brothers were swallowed in the fastness of the Rockies 11 years ago and are believed to have been the victims of an unknown fate. Joseph and William Whitehead travelled to Glacier National Park in August of 1924. The last time they were ever seen was on the 24th of that month. Specifically, they left the Granite Park station on a hiking trip through the park. Their journey was supposed to last 5 days, and they took their light camping gear with them alongside enough rations to last that length of time. They had planned to make the Lewis Hotel on Lake McDonald their first stopping place, but they never arrived, and the last information of the two came from those who saw them depart. Some bit of scenic interest, perhaps. Some comparatively inaccessible spot attracted the attention and footsteps of the two, say those familiar with the trail. This was stated as such because the subsequent search effort, like Dr. Lumley's all those years later, the searchers never found a single trace of the brothers. Not their camping equipment, not their rations, not their clothes, nothing. No trace has yet been found of the brothers, despite 5 parties of 5 men, all experienced in woodcraft, are engaged in the search. One searching party, working in the region of Hidden Lake, was driven out Thursday by a large grizzly bear, and it is thought that possibly the men may have met their end to this bear. It's rather important to note though that they never actually found any evidence of this, and they did investigate this avenue further, whatever that then looks like. Following this, weather in the park began to worsen, and as conditions became increasingly bad, the searchers were having a much more difficult time searching. Hope for the safety of the 2 brothers has been despaired by park authorities, who say that weather conditions in the park are now bad, and with the falling of light snow a few days ago, all tracks which might lead to a clue have been obliterated. Somewhere in the bleak and dreary wintry wastes of Glacier National Park, the final resting place of 2 Chicago boys will remain a secret for at least another 8 months until the vast stillness again yields to nature and warms up to become America's playground for another season. To put it simply, the searchers had no leads, authorities had absolutely no idea what happened to these 2, and effectively, they were coming to the conclusion that the only way they were going to be found was by accident, simply filling the park with numbers who were there to hike. For days and weeks after the brothers were reported missing, organised searching parties, which at times numbered 75 men, under leaders who knew the park as no others, scoured Glacier Mountains in every place where these 2 might have wandered. Not a trace was found. However, when snow came to blot out any tracks which might have made a clue, the searching parties were called in and disbanded. Unfortunately, that was basically the end of the paper trail, and like Dr. Lumley, Joseph and William, nor their remains were ever found. Later articles, alongside the disappearance of Lumley, would comment on just how similar these disappearances were. Both had professionals and volunteers all over the place looking, along with dogs, but in either case, no trace was ever found. And by the way, it's quite literally almost 100 years later now, or nearly 90 for Dr. Lumley, and to this day, neither of them have ever been found. Now, while writing about this, it dawned on me that I'd reported on a couple of unusual disappearances in this park in the past. Almost 2 years ago now, and a lot of people haven't seen that video, and they're well worth sharing again. So I'm including 2 of the disappearances here. 27-year-old Yijin Hua disappeared on the 11th of August 2008 in the Glacier National Park located in Montana. I want to make it clear that the Daily Interlake newspaper and the reporter Jim Mann took a great interest in this disappearance, and I shall be referring and mostly paraphrasing them a fair bit here, as they were reporting very close to the date of occurrence. I'll leave the links in the description below if you want to refer to the original articles. Now, Yi was originally from Malaysia but ended up making Kentucky his home. Yi was a very fit man and loved his fitness alongside nature. Yi would often go hiking, and this time he planned to hike to Kinsler Lake from Logan Pass. This hike was very carefully planned actually, because his wife was set to go along with him but couldn't in the end because of a family emergency. This was quite fortunate in some ways, because now the park rangers, authorities and the search and rescue teams knew precisely where to look. The authorities also managed to find reviews online that Yi had left in regards to his hiking gear. Alongside the reviews, it was said that he left a considerable amount of biographical information confirming his planned trip and route. The search teams were also confident of the route in question because individuals in the campgrounds had talked with Yi extensively about the park and their plans there. Yi had told his wife that he would be at the end destination at a specific date, presumably the 19th of August, because that is when he was reported missing. I can only imagine that the pair had agreed to be in contact or to have picked Yi up on that date, but when he didn't arrive he was reported missing to the authorities. The search for Yi was extensive and helicopters were in the air with thermal imaging equipment while experienced search dog teams were on the ground, alongside the many professional and volunteer search and rescuers. Unfortunately though, the search provided no clues as to Yi's whereabouts despite the detailed hiking plans, his abilities and general confidence of the area where he should have been. The helicopters never made any positive sightings and the search dogs never picked up Yi's scent. The route in question was around 90 miles in length and extended through rugged country, as said starting at the Sperry Glacier trailhead and ending at Kinsler Lake. Very quickly, they had 25 individuals along with search dogs and 2 helicopters scouring the trail for him. The incident commander, Patrick Sudduth, said that he was hopeful that they would be able to locate Yi, but he knew that the odds of finding him in good condition reduced each day. A week into the search and there were still no new developments at all. The dogs had never found a scent and the helicopters hadn't made any sightings either. There was some amount of confusion present about why they weren't able to locate him. Yi's wife was confident that he would not have left the trail, but because the trail had been thoroughly scoured already, the authorities cited the lack of any tracks and concluded that he must have gone off trail at some point, though the reasoning why is not clear. The search teams organised an intensive 2-day mission with the purpose of scouring the Sperry Glacier, and they were hopeful that they would find his tracks. Unfortunately though, they said that the only tracks that they came across were wolverine and grizzly bear tracks. At this point, they had a professional mountain rescue team join the search who were flown by helicopter to be lowered into various crevices. But after a thorough search, they still had no success in locating Yi. The team also added that no human tracks were seen in the area or near the crevices. During Yi's hike, the weather did take a turn for the worse and a snowstorm had hit the area. One of the search leaders, Jordan White, said it's difficult to gauge tracks based on the melt process and the new snow. But he said that he was confident of the team's thoroughness and that there were no human tracks in the area. It was the 26th of August when the Daily Interlake reported on this incident, and the 31st of August is when they followed up. Patrick Sudduth said that the search had been incredibly frustrating and exhaustive. He said that by this time, over 2,500 man-hours had been put into finding Yi, but they couldn't locate a single trace of him, despite having such detailed knowledge about his plans. Even their deviations from the trailhead and their attempts at searching the very hazardous area were turning up nothing. Patrick said, "You go to sleep thinking about this, and then when you wake up, you're still thinking about it." It's fair to say that this incident was consuming and confusing Patrick somewhat, because he knew how thorough the teams had been in the high probability search areas, but still, they weren't finding anything to help. Yi's car was actually located in Logan's Pass, which would mark the end of the first leg of the trip, as he was supposed to resupply there. However, it was obvious that he hadn't made it to the car. New areas were constantly being added to the search effort, but each search would lead to finding nothing. During the search, they found items such as sandals and a baseball hat, but they never found anything that belonged to Yi. Because absolutely nothing was turning up, the search teams began to speculate that Yi may have tried to downclimb from a cliff, even though they had no idea why he might have done this. Search leader Divaki said it's frightening to think that someone would try downclimbing these kinds of cliffs. It seems that all concerned were desperate for answers and were having a hard time explaining why no clues had presented themselves. It also appears that there were those who placed a large amount of faith in the search dog teams who ultimately came up with nothing. The Daily Interlake checked in again on the 4th of September, only adding that the search had been massive and had encompassed waterfalls, cliffs, trails, and an enormous area off-trail. On the 19th of September, they checked in again, and while there were no new developments, they stated that Yi was an experienced hiker, but no sign of him has been found in either of the places he was supposed to visit or the surrounding areas. That was followed by good hiking safety advice. After that, the trail then goes cold on this case, at least until 3 years later. Glacier National Park officials say clothing and bone fragments have been found that are believed to be from a hiker who disappeared in the park in August 2008. On the 3rd of July, a hiker found a portion of 2 items of clothing matching the description of those worn by Yijin Hua, who was the focus of a prolonged and elaborate search. The clothing was found below steep cliffs in the Floral Park area that was part of Hua's planned route. Park rangers and members of the Flathead County Search and Rescue Team went to the site a couple of times for further investigation. There, they located several items that closely matched Hua's equipment list. That was reported by the Daily Interlake on the 2nd of August 2011. This is particularly interesting because on the 26th of August 2008, the Daily Interlake stated this. Sunday, the team extended its search into the Floral Park area with efforts to explore cliffs overlooking the Avalanche Lake Basin, but White said that those areas have already been repeatedly searched by other teams. Obviously at the time, the searchers never found anything, but 3 years later there his clothing was. Did they simply miss the clothing on the repeated initial searches? We can be fairly certain that this area was searched because the 2011 article continued. At the time of disappearance, search leaders expressed concern that Hua may have attempted to climb down the cliffs along that route. To explain this, the theory that the clothing may have been carried down the slope from the cliffs by water and snow avalanches was offered. I can only imagine that they felt that this was the case because they would have expected to find them in the first instance if they were there. Now, you might imagine that was the end of it, and I suppose it technically is in regards to the information specific to Yi. But on the 2nd of August 2012, the Daily Interlake reported this. In the ongoing search for missing hiker Jackson Kreiser, there are eerie similarities to a search for another man 4 years ago. Chrysler, a 19-year-old from Michigan who was working his first summer in the park at Lake McDonald Lodge, is believed to have left Logan Pass Saturday on the Hidden Lake Trail with plans for a day hike to Avalanche Lake. He was reported missing the next day and a search was launched. This other man that they are referencing was none other than Yi. As said, this was Jackson's first year working at the park, and he had found himself with some free time and decided to go on that hike. This would be the last time that he would ever be seen. Jackson set off on this hike on the 28th of July 2012, and it was supposed to take around a day to reach that destination. When Jackson didn't show up the following day, he was reported missing to the authorities. This sparked the search effort, and it was quite large in scale, as these searches tend to be. Just to be specific, similar to most searches of this nature, it included deployments both in the air and on foot with search dogs. A couple of days into the search, they identified partial tracks that matched the sole pattern of the boots that they believed Jackson was wearing. They came across these tracks near Mary Baker Lake in the Floral Park area. This, of course, was the area that Yi would be discovered years later. The similarities between the two were not lost on the rangers. They were both hiking alone, and park ranger Kyle Johnson said that they had picked a very similar route and it was the same area. He continued and said that they still have no idea what Yi was thinking when he seemed to deviate from his route. This same area where Yi had gotten in trouble is now where the search effort was focused for Jackson. It's worth mentioning that 12 of the search teams included certified trackers, and it was one of them who found the boot prints. Unfortunately, it seemed that the prints seemed to peter off into nothing. Similar to Yi, Jackson had spoken to other hikers who were able to corroborate with the rangers, who were then able to piece together the information on establishing timings and locations of Jackson. It's also worth mentioning that when they discovered his tracks, they were confident that he would be found in a timely manner. However, they never came across any additional tracks, which could be considered odd. Because they weren't finding any further clues, they brought dogs down to the location of the tracks and they had thermal imaging equipped helicopters flying overhead. Neither were successful, and the dogs simply did not pick up a scent. If you follow David Paulides, this next part may be of interest to you. The Daily Interlake reported this. His intended route is in some treacherous country filled with rock cliffs, waterfalls, wet and slippery rocks, dense vegetation and many boulders. David, of course, mentions boulders or boulder fields as being specific to his criteria. 3 days later, on the 3rd of August 2012, the searchers found new tracks that evening. The following is from an article by the Farmington Daily Times reported on the 5th of August 2012. Incident Commander Scott Emmerich says that the tracks discovered by trained human trackers are believed to be from the type of boots worn by the missing hiker and different from the tracks found on Tuesday. It appears that they again believed that the tracks belonged to Jackson. However, they also stated that they appear to be different from the earlier discovered tracks. I'm not sure exactly what that means here. Are they suggesting that they belong to different people? Or are they saying that the tracks were more clear or something like that? I'm not sure, but unfortunately, similar to the prior tracks, they also seem to peter off with no further indication of where Jackson may have gone. At this stage, it had been around a week of intense searching, and because no trace of Jackson was surfacing, the search was also scaled down in size, but still active. It depends on your perspective, but some may find this next part a little bit odd. Around a month after the search concluded, Jackson's body was discovered on the 13th of September 2012 by hikers who were present in the park. The hikers notified park rangers early that afternoon who were able to confirm that it was Jackson. According to the Missoulian paper, Flathead County Sheriff Chuck Curry said that the cause of passing was likely a fall. An intensive search in the days following Jackson's disappearance focused on the area between the Hidden Lake, some 5 miles south of Logan's Pass, and Avalanche Lake to the west. Curry said that the specific area where Jackson had now been found was searched by air. Of course, again, the searchers could have just missed Jackson, but there is a similarity here with Yi, where the area he was found had also been searched previously. Now, it wasn't mentioned in the prior article, but Jackson was actually found in a body of water. The sheriff was actually fairly certain that the cause of passing was due to a fall. However, the pathologist found that this was not the case at all. The pathologist stated that Jackson had sustained no major injuries and that the cause of passing was likely down to exposure. In this instance, that means either hypothermia or being submerged in the cold water. How Jackson entered the water is not clear, but the obvious theory is that he tripped and fell. However, the pathologist said that categorically there was no significant vertical fall. The sheriff stated that Jackson may have just hit his head, but the pathologist just didn't seem to think that was the case. Since Jackson was found in the water, that could then explain why the aerial searches had failed at the time, since he could have been submerged. It's also important to clarify that Jackson wouldn't have needed an injury to pass away under these circumstances. We have what is known as a cold shock response, and when suddenly submerged into very cold water, it can cause involuntary inhalation of the water, and the sheer temperature can cause cardiac arrest. This surge must have been very frustrating for the rescuers because they may have been close on a number of occasions where the boot prints were present. It's unfortunate that they seem to peter out each time. Unfortunately, there doesn't appear to be any further information on this case, so there isn't much of a conclusion other than it looks to have been an accident. Though it would have been interesting to have conclusive reasoning as to how he got in the water, since the pathologist said that no major fall had taken place. I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around and disappearing on the screen. If you found the video interesting, then please do leave a like, hit the bell, and subscribe if you haven't already. If not, then feel free to leave a dislike. I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day, or evening, depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe, guys. Peace.